is what we're looking at today, the age of Jackson. And here it is. Okay, good. Let's go Jackson. Now, before we get to Jackson, we need to deal with the guy before him. We left off with Monroe. Then we get John Quincy Adams, and then we get Jackson. So, here we go. But before we do that, just a little, recap. Previously in APUSH, and this should already be in your notes. Remember, after the War of 1812, there is a period that is called the Era of Good Feelings. And we call it the Era of Good Feelings because, well, first of all, we just didn't lose the War of 1812. We chalked it up as a victory against England again. The Era of Good Feelings is most associated with the two-term presidency of James Monroe. So he was he was lucky. Some presidents are lucky in their timing as to when they're president. Other presidents are unlucky. I'm thinking of Hoover. President Hoover was president when the Great Depression started, and he had nothing to do with it. It was just bad timing. He was elected, and then a few months later, the economy went to crap. President Trump had the bad timing of COVID, right? So there's sometimes you've got good timing and bad timing. And Monroe, he was lucky with his timing. And of course, we're really down to one major political party, so you don't see that infighting that like we have nowadays between our political parties. There's a big feeling of nationalism, pride in our country. We won that second war for independence. And also this time period, and we'll talk about more of this with the reform movements later this week. Because the art and architecture, who's doing like art and architecture for their propaganda poster? It may be literature. Who are my literature people? Yeah, so those propaganda posters and what you're going to be supporting, that is what we call the birth of the American culture. That style of writing, that style of art. It is what is seen as purely American. And, of course, we'll talk more about these guys whenever we get there. We start making school books that are focused on American history and culture.
All juniors, last names S through Z, please report to the upper gym lobby.
All right, so all other juniors, y'all go smile pretty. Here we go. All right. So, economic results of the War of 1812, we talked about this again. The British are trying to flood the American markets with all their manufactured goods because England has already been through their Industrial Revolution. They have lots of stuff manufactured, ready to sell. So we increase our tariffs. We do that to protect American industry. Henry Clay and his American system. That is a protective tariff. It is the first of the protective tariffs. Protective means it is so high, it is intended not just to raise money for the government, because we don't have any income taxes yet in America. The only really income that the government gets is through these tariffs. But this is such a high tariff rate. It is not just to raise money for the government, it is to protect American industries. This sea life. All right, great, thank you. We got a second Bank of the United States. It's going to provide easy credit, meaning it's easy to get a loan if you want to start a new industry or if you want to buy land out west and expand out west. Infrastructure. Oh, this is a $500 word. Who can give me an example of infrastructure?
Roads and bridges.
Roads and bridges. What were kind of the big infrastructure projects back in the day? Canal, which one? Erie Canal. So whenever we're talking about infrastructure with the American system, we're talking about roads, bridges, but in particular, if you need to name something, Erie Canal. There you go. Okay, so, this is so sad. Bless his little heart. So James Monroe, we talked about him as president. This is what his re-election looked like. Look at that. Just killed his opponent. Almost a unanimous electoral vote, but it wasn't. Only Washington gets a unanimous election in the Electoral College. So we've talked about the Missouri Compromise. Henry Clay, you get a slave, Missouri becomes a slave state, Maine's a free state, 3630 line, and that's what it looks like. So let's pause on this real quick. Slave states versus free states. So the red are free, the green are slave, the yellow is territories, and the orange are territories as well. Geographically speaking, there's more territory in the slave states, but tell me about how the number of states break down. No, like how many slave states versus how many free states? Are there more slave states or more free states? They're equal. They're exactly the same, which was the whole problem solved by the Missouri Compromise. You don't want one side to get an advantage over the other. All right. We ended with Monroe and this, right? The Monroe Doctrine, where the United States is telling Europe to keep their hands off of the Americas, the Western Hemisphere. If Europe tries to make any more colonies, if Europe tries to stop any revolutions over in the Americas, we're going to do something about it. All right, here we go. Ooh, this is a good little political cartoon. This is our side of the world over here. Europe, you get that side, you get this side. Here we go. All right, so the election of 1824. Here comes the new stuff. Notice all the different pretty colors. And how many candidates do we have? Yeah, we got 4 candidates. So the era of good feeling is over. In the election previous to this, Monroe swept the board. But he's only going to serve 2 terms because George Washington said 2 terms only, then you're out. So Monroe, he's retired.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until like the 22nd Amendment that was ruled, so is it kind of just like common courtesy to go out?
Yes, it was just tradition. And how dare you run for another term? Yeah. But, this guy, the only guy that did it and won, Franklin Roosevelt, he was like, hey, we're in the middle of a world war here. We don't need to switch presidencies right now. So, and then, of course, we passed the amendment right after he dies. Yeah. So, it is wide open who is going to run for president, and we have 4 major candidates, including our guy, Henry Clay. Oh, my goodness. Look at this. So, you can see how the electoral vote came out. Andrew Jackson has more electoral votes. Next one is John Quincy, then William Crawford, and then Henry Clay. Now let's put our AP Gov knowledge to the test here. In this electoral pie, is anybody winning in the Electoral College? Is this a hot button? Oh, yeah, it is. If you look at the popular vote, more people voted for Jackson than anybody else, and then Quincy Adams, then Crawford, and then our guy. But in the electoral vote, what's the rule? What is the law?
reason if someone has up to 50?
Well, it's by state, so Henry Clay he won popular vote in Kentucky, so he gets all of our electoral votes. So it's winner take all in the states. You add up how many electoral votes you get from all the different states, and you have to have one more than half. One more than half. Does anybody have more than half of the electoral votes? No. So we do not have a winner in the electoral college. Now what? So we've dusted off the Constitution and reread that part of the Constitution about how do we decide an election like this. And the Constitution clearly states that if there's nobody with a majority in the Electoral College, the biggest loser, the guy who comes in last, is kicked off the ballot, and then the House of Representatives will decide between the remaining candidates. One state gets one vote. So even though in Kentucky we get 14 electoral votes, and Missouri only gets 3, whenever the House of Representatives votes, we get a 1 and 1. Which, by the way, was something that was in the Trump playbook in the 2020 election. He was hoping that the House of Representatives would decide, and there would be a majority of Republican states in the House of Representatives. Not Republican lawmakers in the House of Representatives, but Republican states. Because California only gets one vote, right? Anyway, so this goes to the House of Representatives. And this is what the House of Representatives decides. Henry Clay is out. Henry Clay is Speaker of the House of Representatives. Henry Clay is a well-respected person in the House of Representatives. And since he's no longer in the race, Henry Clay has a lot of clout as to how the House will vote. And Henry Clay very openly, through his support to John Quincy Adams. And whenever each state voted, this is how it turned out. And obviously John Quincy Adams has a majority, so he is going to be the next president. List this, make sure we remember this little vocab term here. Corrupt bargain. That is what Jackson and Jackson's people called this. Whenever Henry Clay got kicked out of the election, and then Henry Clay threw his support to John Quincy Adams, Jackson said, well, that's not fair, that's a corrupt bargain. Because one of the first things first thing that President John Adams did was named Henry Clay Secretary of State. Maybe a little bit of a payback. Because I want you to look at this next slide here. Secretary of State historically has been a pretty important job. So, starting with Jefferson, Jefferson's Secretary of State was Madison. The next president was Madison. His Secretary of State was Monroe. Monroe was the next president. His Secretary of State was who became, so you see this? Henry Clay, if tradition holds, who's going to be the next president?
Henry Clay.
Okay? So being named Secretary of State was a really, really big deal. So, corrupt bargain. Whenever the election was in dispute because nobody won in the Electoral College on election day. And Henry Clay had to drop out and And the House of Representatives decided between the top three, and Clay threw his support to John Quincy Adams. Now, looking at these numbers, and me and Braden, we believe in democracy. Who should have been our president here? Andrew Jackson, like it or not, right? But he's not. And Jackson said it's because of this corrupt bargain between Adams and Clay. All right, we got a short little video about Adams' presidency. My internet has been maddeningly slow. It's been, I don't even know if this is going to play. We might have to save this for tomorrow. I'll tell you what, I'll leave it, and then if it ever loads, we'll come back to it. If it stops spinning in about 5 minutes, we'll come back to it. All right. So John C. Calhoun is going to be the vice president, and and this is what John C. Calhoun is saying. So Calhoun is arguing about the corrupt bargain as well. All right. So John Quincy Adams, he's a one-termer. Not a whole lot going on. Here we go.
John Quincy Adams served his country from boyhood until literally the day he died. Born in 1767.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I was afraid of that. I don't know. Have y'all been having
Out of
internet
New Boston,
issues?
he wasn't even a pimple-faced teen when his dad took him to Europe as a personal assistant on diplomatic missions. He grew up to be America's best ambassador and its worst smiler. He was a hit as Monroe's Secretary of State, but he wasn't a lock for president in 1824. There were 4 candidates, including Andrew Jackson, but no one got enough votes to win outright. The House of Representatives voted and chose Adams for president. Why the House of Representatives voted for Adams is the big problem. In what was called a corrupt bargain, Adams made Henry Clay, the Speaker of the House, his Secretary of State, apparently in exchange for Clay supporting Adams. JQA was an honest guy, but it looked like a bribe. And Andrew Jackson, who got the most votes, was the sorest loser ever and helped make Adams' presidency miserable. Adams supported Clay's plan.
He supported Henry Clay's American system, which is good.
Called the American System. It involved building roads, canals, a national university, and more. Jackson also had a plan. It involved all his pals in Congress blocking everything Adams wanted. Jackson won their rematch in 1828, but Adams won a House seat in 1830 and helped lead the anti-slavery movement. In 1848, he had a stroke on the House floor and died. Hey, retirement's not for everybody.
He didn't. That implies he died on the floor of the House. He did not. He dies a couple of days later, but it was because of a stroke. Yeah. Okay, so one-termer, and again, not a terrible whole lot going on in those 4 years. So we're going to jump ahead to Jackson's presidency, and there's 3 big kind of themes around Jackson's presidency, and this is known as the Jacksonian era. And Jacksonian democracy really refers to this, the expansion of the vote to the common man, men without real property as in land. As long as you're a man, you can vote. That happens under Jackson. So the belief in the common man, universal, but not really, it's just white guys. Suffrage and popular campaigning. These were 3 big things, or themes of Jacksonian democracy. We'll start loading this, and we might come back to it once it loads. All right, so the 1828 campaign, it was, just so ugly. It was bad. You know, we saw those campaign ads from Jefferson versus John Adams, and they were ugly. This one gets ugly too. This is a popular flyer you would see advertising, please vote for Jackson. He's a man of the people. He stands up against the corrupt bargainers. And he really tried to connect with people out in the West and, of course, slave owners in the South. And he poo-pooed the Yankees, which was the ugly nickname for Northeasterners. Now, John Quincy Adams, he did fight back. He did his own campaigning. And this is one of the ads from John Quincy Adams, reminding us that Jackson is really not a good guy. Yeah, he's a war hero, and you kill people in war, and that's legit. But this is not people he killed in war. He was a famous dueler. He challenged people to duels, he accepted duels, and he killed people in the duels. A lot of times, dueling back then was quite symbolic. Somebody insults you, you challenge them to a duel, they accept, you both meet out on the open field, and you fire in the air. Because you've proved your manhood of accepting the duel, you've stood up for whatever you stood up for, your honor. But you didn't actually kill the guy because he called your wife fat or whatever. And that's why people were dueling, quite literally. Insults like that. But no, Jackson, whenever he dueled, he meant it. He meant it. Taking a look at this. The expansion of voting rights for white men, 1800 versus 1830. Here, in the green, you have to own property to be able to vote. In the red, you only have to be a taxpayer. And then orange or yellow, and Kentucky and Vermont are the only two, white guys. Don't have to pay taxes, don't have to own property. If you're a white guy, you can vote. So notice, 1800 to 1830. We got a large expansion of universal male suffrage, and there's only 3 states that still have a property qualification. Everybody else are just taxpayers. And a lot of people were taxpayers, obviously. So this shows how male suffrage has expanded, and that's something, of course, de Tocqueville talked about a little bit. So, in the next election, after the corrupt bargain, this is what it looked like. No need for the House of Representatives to get involved. It was a landslide. And Jackson wins rather easily. But you can see sectional preference, right? The West and the South are going to vote Jackson, and then the Northeast and the middle Atlantic coast will go with John Quincy Adams. All right, so the inauguration was one wild party. Let's see if this one is ready to go. Yeah, we're not going to do that one. But I do want to watch this one. Let's give this a second to load. We might go ahead and move on. But his election turned, he said that the people voted him in. He wanted the people to welcome him to the White House. And he welcomed everybody into the White House. The party lasted over a week, and the military had to come in to kick people out of the White House because the party goers would not leave. Here we go.
I absolutely love teaching. I just wish I had more time to prepare fun lessons, especially for science.
Yes. This is a cute little video. I'm thinking, I don't think they must have one. videos of Andrew Jackson, and of course the internet's not
Crazy,
one
ugly,
of
ugly son of a bitch who took the
Sorry.
You scared the crap out of me. No, I'm just shocked.
The shriek. It wasn't even that. It was you.
We'll pause and let that load. It's really good talking
It
about.
scared me. Hold on, can you see me
Were
jump
you
through
gonna
this?
stop him?
I went.
All right, so we'll come back to that. We'll let it load a little
Kind
bit
of looks like
longer.
Albert Einstein.
So Jackson as president, there's a lot. There's a lot. We're going to start. First, he gets into some duels. Now, while he's president, he does kill somebody, but that's because they tried to assassinate him. So it was, self-defense. In fact, the guy that tried to assassinate Andrew Jackson shot at him. The pistol misfired. He threw that one down, got another pistol out of his pocket, shot it. Nothing happened, misfired. And by that time, Jackson was like, this guy's shooting at me. And then walks over there and beats him to death with his cane that he is carrying. And then they get the guy's pistols because, he had evidence. And they test fire them, and they work just fine. It's just the pistols were scared to shoot Andrew Jackson. It was really the deal. But this particular duel was he killed his father-in-law's best friend, who challenged him to a duel.
This guy's my favorite president.
He and it was just over. It was there was a bet on a horse, and it had to do with horse betting, and I don't remember the details about that. But this Dickinson guy, he was like a known dueler as well. And everybody knew that Dickinson was a good dueler, a good shot, and wasn't scared of Jackson. Dickinson challenged Jackson to a duel. Jackson accepts. Whenever they meet for the duel, and you can have all sorts of rules like, 10 paces, turn and shoot, or you can just face off, draw and shoot, or you can take turns. And they decided to take turns. And Jackson gave Dickinson the first shot. And Dickinson hit Jackson square in the chest, an inch from his heart. Jackson stepped back a couple of steps, didn't fall down, drew his gun, and hit Dickinson right here and killed him. And Jackson carried the bullet for the rest of his life. It was too dangerous to get surgery and pull the bullet out. That's Jackson.
So funny.
It's Jackson. The assassination attempt I told you about, and there's his cane, his hickory stick. He was called Old Hickory was his nickname because he used a hickory stick cane later in life. Oh, Lord Jackson. Okay. Do you think this one, do we want to try this one again? It looks like it's almost all over. I apologize for that.
I can't breathe.
Okay.
He's just so ironic. He's so ironic. I love him. I won't.
Jackson.
He's my favorite.
Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States, was a hard-partying, hard-fighting, hard-crazy, ugly, ugly son of a bitch who took the highest office in the land because he felt it. What were you going to stop him? Try. When he wasn't busy shaking the presidency as we know it today, you could find Jackson out behind the White House dueling. The number of duels he took part in varies depending on what source you consult. Some say 13, while others rank that number somewhere in the hundreds, both of which are entirely too many times for a reasonable human being to voluntarily stand in front of someone who is shooting at them. On one occasion, Jackson challenged a man named Charles Dickinson to a duel. The reason behind it wasn't important, not to us, and certainly not to Jackson. Jackson was even kind enough to give Dickinson the first volley. Dickinson happily obliged and shot Jackson, who proceeded to shake it off like a bee sting. When Jackson returned the favor, Dickinson wasn't so lucky, and that's why his face isn't on the 20. Andrew Old Hickory Jackson ran for president in got such a lame nickname, it's because he used to carry around a hickory cane and beat people senseless with it. And if you're wondering why he did that, it's because he was a fucking lunatic. Despite the best efforts of his opponents, the justice system, and whatever force balances the tenuous order of the universe, he succeeded. Jackson's first act in office was to throw a huge party. Less of a civilized celebratory gala and more of a political Burning Man. More than 20,000 people showed up for his inaugural open White House, during which the crowd got so rowdy that Jackson himself was forced to sneak out a window. It wasn't until someone had the bright idea to mix tubs of whiskey on the White House lawn that Jackson was able to sneak back into the House and actually start being president. Jackson's presidency wasn't all Animal House style shenanigans, however. He was also the first president on whom an assassination attempt was made. It was Richard Lawrence III who, in a futile attempt to out-crazy Jackson, believed he was the rightful king of England, and murdering Jackson would secure his claim to the throne because, according to Lawrence, Jackson killed his father in 1832, even though Lawrence's father had never been to America and actually died in 1823. Either Jackson could kill through space and time, or Lawrence is simply the kind of crazy we just don't make anymore. He attacked Jackson while attending a funeral, brandishing two pistols, both of which misfired. Jackson then turned and calmly proceeded to beat Lawrence to near death with his cane until the president's aides pulled him off the would-be assassin. If you're thinking that Lawrence's guns misfired because he lubricated them with rabbit's blood or something else crazy, they were inspected afterwards and determined to be in perfect working order. I'm pretty sure that the bullets, like everyone else, were just scared of Jackson. The legacies of many great men are measured by the words of profound wisdom they leave us. Andrew Jackson is no different. Upon reflection of his life and works, he was quoted as saying, "I have only two regrets. I didn't shoot Henry Clay, and I didn't hang John C. Calhoun." That's right. In a life rich with national partying and spontaneous murder, Jackson's only regret was that he didn't kill quite enough people. People like Calhoun, who was Jackson's vice president.
Alright, so Jackson, that gives you a little taste of Alright, so some of the serious things about Jackson is he was probably the biggest supporter of what becomes known as the spoils system. The spoils system is the practice of political patronage, which means that whenever you get into office, you give jobs to your friends and to your supporters. And it's not that they're qualified, it's that they're your friends, and they helped you get there, so you feel like you owe them. Or you want to be nice. Or your brother-in-law needs a job, right? That's the spoil system, that is political patronage. And Jackson, his friends were as wild and crazy as he was, which did not make for a very stable government. This political cartoon, do you think the artist of this cartoon thinks the spoil system is a good idea? No. Him on top of a pig, right? That's, yeah. And a pig is just greedy and dirty and, yeah. That's what the cartoonist is saying. He's greedy and dirty. The spoil system or political patronage, that's going to last all the way into the early 1900s until finally we start cleaning that up. Indian removal was another hallmark of his presidency, and you probably talked about this previously, particularly with the Trail of Tears. So yeah, Indian removal. So there was an Indian Removal Act of 1830. This is while Jackson was president. Basically, we're going to negotiate with all Native American tribes to move west of the Mississippi. And as you can see in this map, the Mississippi River is actually right here. But we're going to move them even further west than that. But the law actually says west of the Mississippi. We put most of these Native American tribes in what's now Oklahoma. And there's a couple of reasons. Obviously, there is this idea that Indians and Americans can just never get along and coexist. And this land is for Americans, right? So Indians, you gotta move it. There was also gold discovered in this area of Georgia. on Indian territory. And white Americans wanted to take that land. That was really a big reason. And we'll see that later on out west as well. Whenever a valuable resource is found on Indian land, something's gonna happen to the Indians there. So the tribe that is particular to where the gold was found, where the white folks wanted the land, it was the Cherokee. And the Cherokee was actually the most white of all of the Indian tribes. They had adopted a written language, they had a newspaper, they were opening English language and Cherokee language schools. They were, I wouldn't say trying to fit into white culture because they were keeping their own culture, but they also knew that you either had to adapt or die. So the Cherokees were doing the best to get along with the white culture. But with the Indian Removal Act, they were told they have to leave, pack up, and get out. Well, the Cherokees did what any good American would do, and that is sue. And the court case becomes known as Worcester, that word? I don't know how to say it really. Versus Georgia. And the Supreme Court, John Marshall's Supreme Court, sided with the Indians. He said that this is Indian territory. They have it by treaty. They have it by right. The federal government cannot take it away from them with this law. So, Cherokees, put down your suitcases, you can stay in Georgia. And it applied to all other tribes that they were going to kick out as well. Okay? This wasn't just the particular Cherokees in Georgia. It basically nullified this law. Well, this is the quote of Andrew Jackson. He said, John Marshall has made his decision, meaning the Supreme Court has made their decision, now let him enforce it. Andrew Jackson is Commander-in-Chief of the military. So Andrew Jackson can enforce whatever he wants to enforce by using the U.S. military. The Supreme Court, they're 9 guys sitting in a room with black robes on. They don't have the military behind them. So Jackson will ignore, not just ignore, he will go against the Supreme Court ruling and kick out these Native American tribes anyway. And what happens next becomes known as the Trail of Tears. And that is thousands of Indians will die on the forced march out to Oklahoma. The military goes in and removes the Indians. 60,000 total will be removed along the Trail of Tears. And this is the Cherokee removal. Out of the 60,000, 15,000 will die along the way. This does not count the Seminoles that were removed. The Seminoles down in Florida. You had Creek, Choctaw. In fact, there were 5 tribes altogether. And they were nicknamed the 5 civilized tribes. Civilized because, for the most part, they were getting along with their white neighbors. They were adapting to white American culture. There had not been skirmishes on the frontier of their land against white America for decades. So that's why they got the nickname the civilized tribe. And that, of course, includes the Cherokee that we talked about, the Creek, Choctaw, Seminole, what was that one? Is it on here? national and it'll come to me. I think it's another C word. We'll move on while I'm waiting for it to manifest in my brain. Alright, so Indian removal, and we're gonna look at some documents about Indian removal in just a second. Here we go, Jackson and the bank, there he is. Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, here we go. Jackson and the bank, I'm going to go ahead and get this loading, and we'll wait for that because y'all know we gotta wait a second. Alright, Jackson versus the bank. So, Jackson did not like the idea of a national bank. Way back, with Alexander Hamilton, he's the guy that proposed the first national bank. And then Henry Clay brought it back up after the War of 1812 as part of his American system, having a national bank. So now we're on to the second national bank, and that's part of Henry Clay's American system. Now what do we know about Jackson and his feelings of Henry Clay? Yeah, boo, part of the corrupt bargain. So that could be a little bit of why Jackson didn't like the bank, but he saw the bank as being something that was up in New England and, New York City, and that the industry uses the national bank. And he wanted to be the frontiersman, the common man, the man that represents rural and farm and all of that. So he disliked the bank for several reasons. And this is a cartoon of Jackson slaying the many-headed monster, which are all supporters of the bank. This is a famous quote from Jackson. The bank is trying to kill me, but I will kill it. And Congress is passing laws that reinstate the national bank, but Jackson will veto it. Let's see if our video is loaded.
The biggest fight of Andrew Jackson's presidency was his battle against the Bank of the United States. In 1816, Congress had issued a charter creating the Second Bank of the United States. Backstopping all came from the elite.
Alright, well, we'll come back to it.
Classes of the
I apologize for the slowness today. I've been trying to put in grades and it just won't do either. Okay, so the bank. While we're waiting for that to load, let's do a little side by side of the two major parties, and then we'll get back to the bank. The Federalists are dead. The party that takes over from the Federalists become known as the Whigs. And now the old Democratic Republican Party of Jefferson is now just called the Democrats. Okay? So these are our two major parties during the Jacksonian period. Whigs and Democrats. So leaders of the party, the Whig leader is, of course, Henry Clay. He's our guy. Democrats, you got Andrew Jackson. Now, knowing the origins of these parties, what do we think about federalism as where should power lie? The federal government versus the states. What do you think the Whigs would say? Federal or national government, nationalistic, and the Democrats would be states' rights. All right, the common man. Do you think that Whigs think there ought to be universal male suffrage? And what do you think the Democrats think about that? Do you think the Whigs support the common man, universal male suffrage?
No.
They're more the elitist. Well-educated people ought to be the people with power and a voice. Jackson, he was more democratic, at least to the extent of white men ought to be able to vote. Moral reform, this is what we're getting into later with your propaganda posters, because this was a really big deal during the early 1800s. Should the government try to outlaw slavery, outlaw alcohol, provide public education for everybody? Should the government be involved in your life to that degree? And the Whigs say yes. The Democrats, mostly because of the slavery issue, would say no. Just see, like. Yes. Yeah, you want me to send them to you? Alright, yep. Alright. Elston, when we wrap this up, and we're gonna wrap it up in about 10 minutes, go see Miss Archer in the library for your dual credit grade. Okay. Constitution. We're back to the loose constructionism versus strict constructionism. The economy. Government being involved with steering the economy is good, according to the Whigs, whereas the Democrats, they take a more laissez-faire, hands-off view of government involvement in the economy. Sectional support. What section of the country did we say supported the Whigs?
North.
Northeast, yep. And then the Democrat is everywhere else, west and south. And then particular to the American system, since it's his system, obviously the Whigs support all of this. Yes, yes, yes. And the Democrats, no, no, no. Because, especially with the bank. Alright, let's see if we are finished loading here. Look at that. It's not even halfway loaded yet. It's so sad. Alright, we'll come back. The National Bank is going to be the #1 issue in Jackson's re-election year. So Jackson won the presidency in 1828. He's running for re-election in 1832. His opponent is the leader of the Whig Party and his old nemesis Henry Clay. And you can see here how it turns out. Jackson is going to win, at least in the electoral, by a landslide. He does get a majority of the popular vote as well. Henry Clay comes in a distant second and wins a few states in the Electoral College. Of course, he wins Kentucky,
Any
which
students
is
who have not gotten their picture taken, please report to the upper gym lobby.
because that's his home state, even though the West generally supports Jackson. So, the election of 1832, Jackson wins, and he takes that as a sign, a mandate from the American people that the National Bank must go. Well, the check and the X is for what do they feel about the bank. Jackson hates the bank, Clay loves the bank. Jackson is the winner, Clay, big loser again. And moving on. Let's go back up here and see if we are ready to rock. Look at that, it's so shiny, it's so sad. Alright, last thing, and then we're gonna look at our documents. This cartoon. What does this cartoon say about opinions of President Jackson? And by the way, we have a test next Tuesday, and this cartoon is on the test with, I think, 3 multiple choice attached to it. So if we know this cartoon, hopefully those will be some easy questions on that test. How is he dressed? Yes, as a king. So Are we supposed to have kings and absolute monarchs? No. What is he stepping on? Constitution. So, give me an example of him ripping up, stepping on the Constitution.
He did not listen to Supreme Court.
Yeah, the Supreme Court. Part of the president's big job is to enforce the law. And whenever the Supreme Court said, well, the way we interpret the Constitution, this is the law. Jackson should support that, but he did not. He went against the Supreme Court ruling, kicked out the natives anyway. What's he holding?
Veto.
Oh, yeah, he has a scepter here, which is like, a kingly thing. But yeah, the other hand, he has the veto. And he does use the veto quite a bit. He rejected the National Bank several times, and he will use his veto quite often. And that goes to him being an absolute monarch. He is saying no to Congress, which is the elected body of the people. Okay, let's give this one more try, and then we'll call that good for the day. We'll finish Jackson tomorrow. I think it's funny that even though he hated the National Bank, the central bank, what's going on here? What did I do?
Technology just hates you today.
Oh, there's an X. Okay, thank you. It does hate me today. He's on the $20 bill.
The biggest fight of Andrew Jackson's presidency was his battle against the Bank of the United States. In 1816, Congress had issued a charter creating the second Bank of the United States. Bank stockholders all came from the elite classes of the Northeast, and they were appointed, not elected.
The president of the bank was a Philadelphia aristocrat named Nicholas Biddle, and Jackson thought that Nicholas Biddle was operating the bank for the benefit of Nicholas Biddle and for his buddies.
Even though it was the sole repository for the federal government's deposits, the Bank of the United States remained a private institution. While paying out dividends to the government, it also made a profit for its stockholders.
They didn't just simply take the federal deposits and stick them away in a vault. They take those deposits and they loan them out. And they make money by loaning those deposits out. And so the bank is making very, very good money at this time period.
Jackson was the first American president to come from a poor background. Like many ordinary Americans, he hated the idea of a private bank run by a small number of wealthy stockholders.
Jackson wanted to get rid of it, and he said he was going to get rid of it. And whenever Jackson said he was going to do something, he usually ended up doing it, regardless of the opposition.
When the bank's charter came up for renewal in 1832, Jackson vetoed the bill, declaring that the bank was unauthorized by the Constitution, subversive of the rights of the states, and dangerous to the liberties of the people. With his re-election approaching, Jackson had staked his entire presidency on the issue of the bank.
And it was a triumph for Jackson. He was soundingly re-elected. He was a very popular man. So the Bank of the United States knew that it was toast.
Once he was re-elected, Jackson took his revenge on the bank one step further. He decided to remove all of the federal government's deposits from the bank and place them in smaller local banks that he selected personally. His critics called them his pet banks.
In order to do that, he has to have the Secretary of the Treasury remove the deposits. The first Secretary of the Treasury he goes to, he says, I want you to remove the deposits. And this Secretary of the Treasury was a bank man and said, well, I'm sorry, President Jackson, I can't do that. He has this person moved to a different office. The second Secretary of the Treasury, a guy by the name of William Duane, comes into office. And Jackson says, well, Mr. Duane, I want you to remove the federal deposits. And Duane says, well, I'm sorry, Mr. President, I can't do that. And he summarily fires Duane. The third Secretary of the Treasury is Roger Taney, who's moved over from the Attorney General position. And Jackson says, Mr. Taney, I want you to remove the federal deposits. And Taney says, well, yes, Mr. President, I'm happy to remove those federal deposits. And now Taney wins.
This guy is wild.
following decades would be a time of laissez-faire as economic power moved away from the federal government and towards private businesses.
Alright, so Jackson and the bank. Alright, there's a couple more things about Jackson, but I think we are going to pause there so we will have plenty of time to look at our documents for today. Those, I think, are over here. Yeah. Okay, so what we have here is Andrew Jackson. There's two excerpts from Jackson's speeches or letters, and they are both concerning Indian removal. The Indian Removal Act, Trail of Tears, the whole Indian removal show. And what we are going to do, we are going to work on a skill in the DBQ essay, document-based question essay, that's why we got the documents, called analysis, document analysis, or I like to use the acronym HIP. We're going to practice with this. So we're here. Yeah, where were we? Some of these are going pretty fast. Yeah, we're here. Okay, that's good. Yeah, the last half goes a little bit quicker than the first half.
Here you go, baby girl.
Okay, so here we go. Starting at the top, please. Here we go. No, that's not what I wanted. I want that. Okay. Directions. Write a summary of the document which provides a direct answer to the prompt, and analyze the document using one of the HIPs. So,